what we're going to take a look at today, the title of the shiur is Plague and Persecution. What we're going to take a look at today is the relationship between those two things, specifically in the context of the Black Death in the late 1340s, early 1350s. As many of us know, 1348, 1349 was the peak of the plague. We know that it wiped out a third. The plague wiped out to a third to a half of the European population. It started in Asia, and it spread to Europe. It spread to Europe in 1347 in the wake of a battle in Crimea between the Tatars, the Mongols, and the Italians in the Crimea. And one of the tactics that the Mongols used was that they had plague already in their ranks, and they would catapult the corpses, they would catapult the dead bodies from their own camp into the Italian, the Venetian or the Genoese camp. And that's what first brought the plague to Europe from Asia. And of course, we know that eventually the Jews were blamed. They didn't understand in these days, in those times, they didn't understand plague so well. And they thought that plague had to do with, they didn't have a germ theory. They didn't have a theory of, they didn't think there was anything alive inside, that inside the human body that was causing the plague. They thought it was bad air. They thought it was poison. And when it's bad air and when it's poison, you can find a scapegoat. And they did find a scapegoat. And the scapegoat they found was the Jews. So I want to look at some sources, some writings from Jewish writings about the plague and about its aftermath, the persecution of the Jews and its aftermath, to understand how they relate to it. This is I don't know about you, but I think about last few months. I've been thinking a lot about plague and historical reactions to plague. I've written a few things already and given a few shiurim on different aspects. So this was another aspect of it, the relationship of plague and persecution. So I am going to share a screen. I'm going to share my screen, but before I do that, I want to share a Can everyone see this? This is a mass grave. It's one of the only archaeological records, possibly the only archaeological record of persecution of Jews during the time of the Black Plague. It was found in a Spanish city in Spain called Tárrega. This article appeared 6 years ago, and it's an archaeological article. It's the study of the archaeology itself. This was this mass grave that they found in Tárrega, the city in Spain. Now that city, and the fact that the Jews of Tárrega were massacred, is recorded in Jewish sources. Specifically, there was a rabbi named Rabbi Chaim Gali Papa. So I'm gonna share my screen again. So Rabbi Chaim Gali Papa, his work did not survive. He has a work called Emek Rephaim. Emek Rephaim did not survive, but parts of it were copied into a different book that was written about a century later called Emek HaBacha. Emek HaBacha is, as it sounds, the Valley of Tears, is a chronology of tragedies to befall the Jewish people throughout history. And he discusses what happened in Spain. This is particularly Spain, in Catalonia, northeastern Spain, during the time of the plague. And he describes this massacre in Tárrega as well as in other cities, but Tárrega got it worst. That's 5108, which is 1348. He dever kaved mi mizrach hashemesh. So they already knew that it came from the east. There was a terrible plague that came from the east, from east to west, spanned the whole world. Lo haita kirya asher sagva mimena, no place was spared. Kakatuv be'emek Rephaim asher katav Rabbi Chaim Gali Papa. We don't know a lot about Rabbi Chaim Gali Papa. He lived in the 1300s. He died in about 1380. There is one response and one tshuva from the Rivash that's addressed to Rabbi Chaim Gali Papa. And at that point, he lived in Pamplona. Pamplona, the famous place where they have the running of the bulls. That's where Rabbi Chaim Gali Papa lived in his later years. Here he's much younger. During the time of the plague, he was a younger man. By Yamim Hahem, and you see that he uses biblical imagery by Yamim Hahem, biblical phraseology. Ein Melech be'Aragon. Right? Lulei Hashem Shayelalu lo nishar me'ayehudim asher ba'Aragon beCatalonia sarid upalit ki ha'elilu alilot. They libeled us. Beresh alemor bepesha Yaakov kol zot. All of this plague, is due to the Jews. Ehem hiviu sam memit ba'olam. They brought this deadly poison to the world. Me'itam haita nesiba. So it's not clear here that they had a full-blown theory of, oh yes, the Jews were poisoning the wells. They're just saying it's the Jews' fault. The Jews did something. They fasted. They ate now we get to the specifics. Barcelona. First attacked the Jews in Barcelona. So in the Megillat Esther, we have Uvaviza lo shalchu et yadam. Here it's no, they pillaged them. And that was an important part of it because a lot of people owed Jews money. The Jews were the middlemen between the wealthy classes and the poorer classes. And they had a lot of debts and they owed a lot of people owed them. Be'ein omer hashev. Odam milchamim, Hashem natan kolot umatar v'geshem shotef ve'esh mitlakachat ve'yiva'alu hakamim alehem balal Hashem svatam. So if not for this sudden thunderstorm, it would have been much worse. Vayilchu gam tzarei ha'ir v'gdola ve'yatzilu hanisharim miyadav. Vayahila yamim od, vayikumu kol yadim asher Cerbera, another city in Spain. Argumehem kishmona esrei nefesh. They killed about 18 people there. And then they continue. Vayihi yamim od shlosha beyom ha'asiri Yom ha'asiri l'chodesh Av, 10th day of Av, b'yom anot nafsham yakumu gam yoshvei sarega. That actually should be tarega. It's a typo. That's Tarega. That's the town where we saw those. Those pictures, that archaeological dig. Now, Tarega is probably not a city that you've heard of. Barcelona is. In Barcelona, he says that 20 people died. In Cerbera, 18 people died. But when it came to Tarega, 300 people died. And it seems that Tarega, he got hit a lot harder than any place else. And that's borne out by the archaeological evidence here. This also, Gamal Yoshvei Sholshona ve Salkona, there's a map. You can map this out from one end to the other, and I'm going to stop the share here. You can map this out from one end to the other and see that the spread of the riots against the Jews, the spread of the pogroms, it follows a line. It's just starts in Barcelona and goes further and further into the interior of Spain. I'm going to share now a couple of other sources here from Spain, and that they paint something of a different picture. First, here you have the Rashbash, the son of the Tashbates, and this isn't a tshuva, it's more of a philosophical tshuva about whether or not all deaths are decreed on Rosh Hashanah, let's say. And he says that one of the proofs that he brings that not all deaths are decreed on Rosh Hashanah is that if all death was decreed on Rosh Hashanah, then what would be the point in fleeing? There would be no point in taking precautions against plague. Either you were condemned on Rosh Hashanah to die, or it was decided on Rosh Hashanah that you were going to live. What's the point in taking any action? He says that there's this third category where, you're not completely protected, but you're also not condemned, and you have to take the right measures in order to avoid death. And one of his proofs is, it would flee from. He's talking about plague in this section. Or Pa'amayim. The Ran, the great Ran, the greatest Rav in Spain in the time of the Black Plague, he fled plague. And in fact, you have a lot of, so first, let's take a step back. The Gemara in Bava Kama says, Dever ba'ir kanes raglecha. When there's dever, when there's plague in the city, you're supposed to go inside, go indoors. And there are many poskim and rabbanim that have been using that Gemara during this era of COVID-19 to say that, yes, isolate yourself, like the Gemara says. But for many centuries, people did the opposite of what seems to be the opposite of what that Gemara says, including great Gedolim, like the Ran. When Dever came to the city, they bolted, they ran. And there are a couple of recent papers on this. There's one that's going to be coming out, more comprehensive one about how this changed. And it was, by the way, it wasn't just Ashkenazim, it wasn't just Sephardim. Everybody ran in the times of plague. And we'll see a couple more sources on that soon. And the question was, how do they justify that with the Gemara? Which is it's an interesting study, but not for now, probably a little bit too enjoyable for Tisha B'Av. But here you see that in the time of plague, the Rashbash brings the Ran. He fled. And the Ran himself, in one of his drushos, in the famed drushos Haran, he talks about different kinds of plague. He says, Ra'inu Musar Elokeinu, we saw the Musar, the rebuke of our God, Zeyud Gimel Shana, 13 years ago, Ad Shenishtenu Sidrei Breshit. You think about how he's saying this, that nature changed. The creation itself changed. Ki yarad rab shana hahi l'rov yoshei olam. In that year, terrible things descended to everyone in the world. V'chalu b'hem chalaim mishunim. And they fell sick with strange illnesses. It's no way that this is natural, that these derive from anything natural. Anyone that has any intelligence has to admit that this was the finger of God. All other illnesses are natural. Strange, bizarre illnesses like these, that's not nature. This is a punishment from God, an evidence that He is watching over us. So here in both Rashbash and Ran, you have no intimation that there's any sort of persecution. And the truth is that the persecutions, when they happened, it was primarily in Christian lands. In Muslim lands, there was plague, but there was no persecution. There was no conspiracy theory that it was the Jews who perpetrated them. Ran, when this started, Ran was in Christian Spain, in Barcelona, in fact, I think. But yes, somehow maybe it was because he fled. He doesn't discuss anywhere the conspiracy aspect, and it's also absent from Rashbash. And this Rashbash lived in Algeria, which is a Muslim land, which was controlled by Muslims. And there's a matzeva, there's a gravestone from the city of Toledo for a young man of 15 years old who died from the plague. And you see, the pathos that's in it. A sweet flower, Yeled Shashuim, Timim Deim, Haya Koreba Torah, Shoneba Mishnah U'Gemara. He was a young, budding Talmud Chacham. Lamad me Aviv Masha Lamad me Rabotav. He learned from his father what his father had learned from his teachers. Bet Chukei Elohim Evet Toratav, God's laws and God's Torah. Haya ben Tedvav Shanim, 15 years old. Vidat Kiven Shmonim. But in his mind, he was already 80 years old. Baruch Mibanim Asher. He was the most blessed of all sons, Asher. His name was Asher. And if you think about but it says over here, Lamad me aviv, masha lamad mi rabotav. His father was also something of a Torah scholar, had to have been something of a Torah scholar. And if you look at when this boy dies in 1849, and he was 15 years old, which means that he was born in, 1349. He was born in 1334, which was about 7 years before one of the great Rabbanim who lived in Toledo passed away, and that was none other than Rabbeinu Usher, the Rush. So it's quite possible that when this little boy, this 15-year-old boy, his father was a student of the Rush, and he was named after the Rush. And he was studying from his father. When he was studying from his father, he was studying what his father had learned from the Rush. Ben Rav Yosef ben Turiel, Hakel Yenachamehu, Niftar Magefa, Bechodesh Tammuz, Shnas Kuf Tes, 1349, V'yamim achadim lifnei moto bana beito. Just a few days before he passed away, he had built his house, which presumably means that he had just gotten married. Ve'emesh ne'afach kol chatan v'kol kala kol yilala. And now this sound of the chatan and kala has turned into a wailing. Ve'yeshiv av nichav v'nidav elokim romim yishalem lo nechumim lo shovev nefashim zera anashim. So I saw that there was a hand raised. Can we unmute Uri so that he can ask his question?
Yeah, I just did.
You sure you got the right Uri? There's more than one Uri, I think.
No, same with the hand raised. Uri, I did try unmute you. If you're trying to talk, you probably have to accept the unmute or something. Here we go.
Mistake. Sorry. Go ahead. There's a mistake. Sorry.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay. All right. Now we get to Ashkenaz, and in Ashkenaz the story gets a lot more complicated. By the way, that insight about the Rush was suggested by a close friend who we're both going to be talking about different aspects of this theme today. He in Pittsburgh, me in this short presentation here, Rabbi Daniel Yalkut. So that insight about the Rush is from Rabbi Yalkut. So switching over to Ashkenaz, the theory that spread was that the Jews were poisoning the wells. And they had a lot of evidence, meaning they had confessions from Jews saying that, yes, we sure did poison the wells. And how they got these confessions was October 10th in Chatel, at the castle thereof. So you'll see that this starts in Savoy. So if you know your European geography, Savoy it's the area of France that's, let's say, just south of the French. It's along the French border with Italy, south of the French border with Switzerland. And you'll see that the spread of this theory, of this conspiracy theory, it begins there, in that area along the French border, in the area of France, along the border with Switzerland and with Italy. And then from there, it spreads into other cities in Switzerland, and then it spreads up the Rhine River, and it spreads out toward Bavaria. And eventually, we'll see that it covers almost all of the German-speaking lands. The exception is Austria. The Austrian king at the time protected his Jews, protected the Jews that were in the Austrian lands. And in Austria itself, in what was then Austria, there was very little in the way of actual persecution of the Jews. But in Germany, it changed the face of German Jewish history forever, as we'll see. So on this October 10th, 1848, so you see that there's a judicial procedure here. So they caught this Jew named Agumet, who lived in Geneva. He was arrested at Châtel. And he was put to the torture a little. They didn't torture him that much. They tortured him a little bit. They only cut off 4 of his fingers. I don't know what a little bit of torture means. After a while, after having subject again to a little bit of torture, he confessed in the presence of many great many trustworthy persons. So after going through 2 rounds of torture, he admitted to many trustworthy persons, who are later mentioned. To begin with, it is clear that at the Lent just passed, Pultus Classis Tirans had sent this very Jew to Venice to buy silks and other things for him. So a non-Jew, a Christian, had sent this Jew to Venice to buy things for him. When this came to the notice of Peyret, a Jew of Chambry, Rabbi Peyret, I don't know what that name is supposed to be. This rabbi of Chambry, that's also in this same region, who was a teacher of their law, he sent for him and he gave him, he said, we heard you're going to Venice. I'm going to give you a little package. It's got some poison and some venom. Pour it into the wells, pour it into the cisterns, pour it into the springs in Venice and other places in order to poison the people who use the water of the aforesaid wells will have been poisoned by you, namely the wells in which the poison will have been placed. And he did it. He carried it out. He poured it into the cistern near the German house in Venice. And he was paid for this. So then he became a machmir. His Rebbe paskined for him that you have to poison the wells in Venice. So he was machmir. He says, after that, he was going to southern Italy, Calabria and Apulia, that's the heel of the boot, of Italy. He threw the aforementioned poison into many wells, and he confessed that he put the same poison in the wells of the streets of Belley, and he just started confessing everything. Yeah, I also put it in Toulouse, and I also put it in the wells that are near the Mediterranean. And at a point, he just started confessing to everything, which is, when you confess to every murder that was ever committed, you know that you're confessing to crimes that you didn't commit, but doesn't matter. They took this as a confession, and they took this as evidence that it was the Jews. And the reason we still have these is because these were court documents in archives. It wasn't simply this popular belief that, the peasants thought that it was the Jews' fault, so the peasants went and perpetrated pogroms against the Jews. No, there were courts and there was evidence given with Jews bearing witness, having succumbed to torture, that yes, we poisoned the wells. And in these confessions, you even have the ingredients. Oh yeah, we put in a little bit of this, and we put in a little bit of that, and we put in snakes, and we put in pigs, and we put in, the blood of Christian babies, and you name it, we put it in there. And the worst case, the worst of all of the pogroms happened on St. Valentine's Day, February 14th, in the city of Strasbourg. Some Jews baptized themselves and they were spared, but for the most part, the Jews of Strasbourg, about 20,000 of them, were burnt to death in the city of Strasbourg on Valentine's Day, 1349. This map you can see here. This is a map of all of the different places where we have a record of Jews of massacres of Jews during the Black Death. The chief towns where outbreaks against the Jews occurred in 1348, 1349. So you see it, Chillon was right where it was starting, right at the beginning. And this doesn't even include the things that we already saw that happened in Spain. And you see that the main, it spreads from there up. Here, Strasbourg is 1349, spreads up the Rhine River and down the Danube, and eventually it covers, it gets to most of what's today's Germany, but it doesn't get, Krems and Innsbruck are both in Austria today. Those are the only two places in Austria, but in the interior of Austria, you don't have persecutions because the Jews there were protected. When you get further east, you didn't have Jewish communities there, but 100 years later, you definitely had Jewish communities. It was a result of the Black Plague that you began to see massive Jewish migration to places east, to Poland and to Bohemia and to Hungary. There was one interesting study, and it's a chilling study that was done recently. They took all of the places where Jews were persecuted and where there was violence against Jews during the Black Plague, and they compared them to different markers of anti-Semitism in the 20th century. And here, as he sums up, we find persistence of anti-Semitic attitudes and behavior for more than half a millennium. Localities that burned their Jews in 1348 to 1350 showed markedly higher levels of anti-Semitism in the interwar period between World War I and World War II. Attacks on Jews were 6 times more likely in the 1920s in towns and cities with Black Death pogroms. The Nazi Party's share of the vote in 1928, when it had a strong anti-Jewish focus, was 1.5 times higher. Readers' letter to virulently anti-Semitic Nazi newspaper were more frequent. Attacks on synagogues during Kristallnacht in 1938 were more common. And a higher proportion of Jews was deported. The anti-Semitism that we saw in 1348, 1349 was still there 600 years later, and those were the places that were most likely to have anti-Semitism 600 years later, when the Nazis came to power. In terms of Jewish memory, you had in Worms, I'll wrap up with this. In the city of Worms, you had a fast day declared, Yud Adar, the 10th of Adar, and on a leap year, the 10th day of Adar Sheni. There was a Ta'anit Tzibur, a public fast day, Ta'anit Gezeirat Kuftet, was fasting for the Gezeira of the year 1349. And it gives a list. These are the different slichos that you're supposed to say on those days. This was compiled by Rav Yosef Shamish, who was a Shamish and a big Talmud Chacham of the city of Worms in the 1600s, a fascinating historical figure in his own right. And you also have Maharil, who is only a couple of generations after the Black Plague. He notices that there's already a gulf separating his generation from the generations before that. He quotes something from the Sefer HaAgudah. The question is, according to the Gemara, everybody is supposed to mourn when a Talmid Chacham passes away. Everyone is supposed to mourn, but we don't really do that. Talmidei Chachamim passed away. We don't all mourn for them. And he quotes the Agudah as explaining why not, the Sefer HaAgudah. He says, Tacha Zimar, Ze Mechaber Hayakodem HaGzirot. The Sefer HaAgudah, the author of HaAgudah, lived before the Gezerot. Before then, they were major Gaonim. Now we don't know anything. There was this real sense of we don't know anything. We're a Dor Yatom. It's similar to, it might be rhetorical and it might be a little bit of an exaggeration, but I think it's something that we definitely have experienced in our lifetimes when we all grew up with Rabbeim saying that the Torah world today is nothing compared to what it was in Europe, that the Talmidei Chachamim that we had in Europe were just so much more, you can't even imagine how much greater they were in Europe. And there's certainly some truth in it, but there's certainly also some sense that, our world, the world that existed before 1348, 1349, is no longer here. In Ashkenaz, it actually began a little bit earlier. There was another series of massacres about a half a century before the Black Plague, the Rindfleisch massacres, where you had a number of the greatest Rabbanim throughout Europe were killed or fled. The Rush, who we already mentioned, the author of Hagot, Maimoniot, the Mordechai, Marami Rutenberg. That generation was wiped out. And so the Maharil, who's writing in the late 1300s or the early 1400s, acutely feels that the world has changed. The world of Torah in Germany has changed. And it wouldn't really be reconstituted until the 1500s in Poland, which became the new center. Another thing that we have is, we're going to skip the Yam Shel Shlomo. You know what? We're not going to skip the Yam Shel Shlomo. The Yam Shel Shlomo is quoting a different tshuva from the Maharil about fleeing during plague. And the Maharil, one of the things that he does, we saw that there's a contradiction between people were fleeing, but at the same time, the Gemara says to stay put, not to flee. So the Maharil's Rebbe, Rabbi Shalom of Neustadt, who lived in Vienna and in Neustadt, which is also in Austria, he explains that he makes an okimta. He says, no, this is the first part of the plague, that's the second part of the plague. At the beginning of the plague, you can flee. But after the plague, once the plague is already taken hold, you have to stay put. And so he paraphrases this. Marina Nami calls, okay. That the roads become dangerous. Once this plague is established, you shouldn't flee. And this is Maharshal, Yam Shel Shlomo's own commentary, and this is in the 1500s. It's dangerous to flee. Bein ha'umot yoto min hadever. That the danger that you're going to face from the umot, from the nations on the roads, is worse than the threat of the plague itself. Kasher ba'avonotenu harabim yadua, as is well known. And this last source, we're not going to go through it, is a kina that was composed for Tisha B'Av in commemoration of the persecutions of 1348, 1349. You see that all the way, that right at the beginning, it talks about this Divrei Onot Gavru Pihem Alai Pa'aru, they libeled against me. Sam Hamavet Samu Vayazoru Al Pnei Hamayim, they placed poison and scattered it on the waters. Dovrim Havot Aleinu Lehitkolel Lehitnapel Aleinu, they're using this as an excuse to attack us. Eres Samu B'chilyenu v'yashlichu al hamayim. They said about us, they libeled us that we poisoned, by saying that we poisoned the wells. And I don't know of anyone who says this kina anymore, but this kina is a final recognition or a final acknowledgement, how this was received and how this was remembered in Ashkenaz. There's almost no mention. It's almost no mention here of the terror of the dever itself, of the plague itself. It was completely overshadowed. The plague itself, and by the way, the idea that Jews didn't suffer as much from the Black Plague is something of an urban legend. Jews suffered just as much as the non-Jews from the plague itself. But what they suffered from the persecutions in the wake of the plague was far worse, and that's what remained in Jewish memory. The persecution way overshadowed the plague. And I think there we'll end on this, that you see this a formative event in European history and a formative event in Jewish history, how it was remembered, how it was commemorated in various Jewish sources, and the lasting effects that it had on our world, whether it's on the Torah world, meaning the shift of, the creation of new places, the emptying of Germany and the shifting of new centers of learning to Poland, and also on the non-Jewish world, where the ideas about Jews that really, this was the first real, these persecutions overshadowed anything that had come before it. So the first real full-blown persecution based on conspiracy theory, 600 years later, it was those same places where it was believed and the same places where pogroms were carried out were the very places that the Nazi Party had found its strongest support. So you see that the things that begin in 1348, 1349 have very strong, very lasting effects throughout Jewish history. Have an easy fast.